Thank you, Board, for taking the time and joining me on the show today. Really appreciate it and have been looking forward to this conversation. It's interesting. I usually start by asking people to share their story from as early as they're willing to start, but you're a pseudonymous character. I've been operating this brand somewhat pseudonymously since the origin, and you're the first guest of that nature that I've had on the show, so it's pretty cool. And rather than the normal start off question, you've built this parody account on Twitter with over 1.7 million followers. Now you're doing some investing, a bunch of other interesting things. So I'd love to ask you to tell the story, not of yourself, but of Board Elon, who you're joining as today.
Yeah, I guess the origin story is Board is 8 years old in metaverse years, if we're going to use that word, which might be changed soon. But yeah, it was 2013, and on that particular day, Real Elon had released a white paper with plans on basically how to build something called the Hyperloop, a high-speed train that would be underground, going through a tunnel, and traveling at immense speeds because of the lack of air resistance and various other reasons. But anyways, he kind of punctuated that white paper with the fact that he doesn't have time to build it, and he just kind of put that out there because he had a little bit of time to put out the idea, and he encouraged other people to do it as well. And to me, that was just like such a superhero slash super villain move. And it made me think about like what other ideas does he have in his spare time when he's bored. And that's really what prompted the character to create Bored Elon Musk. And the first 5 to 6 years was just tweeting silly, funny ideas for inventions, like really complicated, unnecessarily complicated solutions to everyday problems. And people really dug it. It got picked up by a lot of Silicon Valley folks and media, and it grew to what it is today. But then around 2019, 2020, and especially this year, I started to really diversify kind of what the Board account was, and to be honest, really kind of just tried to separate myself a little bit from Real Elon. He's an amazing human being, respect to him, but I didn't want to just be kind of this caricature, because that I think gets boring, pardon the pun. So I started to dabble in a lot of areas, especially crypto, and that was particularly valuable for me just because operating as a pseudonym, it's tough to run a business. It's tough to like make stuff and sell stuff and not dox yourself. And with crypto becoming as common as it is today, and people using it regularly to pay for goods and services, it really opened up a whole new world to me. And yeah, as you alluded to, it's pushed me down the road of investing, founding projects, companies, mentoring people, and really just kind of expanding the amount of content and the type of content that I talk about. So I'd like to think that Board is kind of more of his own unique brand today, and still certainly benefits from the halo effect of Elon being on Twitter and saying wild stuff, but also having kind of his own identity. So that brings us to basically 2021 and where we are right now.
That's a great intro, and I appreciate you sharing it. I definitely want to dig into what it's been like to operate a pseudonymous brand for, or a pseudonymous profile for going on 8 years, I guess. It's a long time. I've been doing it for maybe two, and I think there's various sort of nuanced differences between what we're doing. Yours is like a character. I'm sort of just myself. But before we dig into all the ins and outs of being a pseudonym, um, one thing I'm curious is like you mentioned this transition from sort of being like a parody Elon account to now you're tweeting a little bit more about crypto. Like blockchain gaming is something I know you're really interested in particular. Was there any, or is there any, I guess, sort of friction given that you built this audience on like sort of like you said, complicated solutions to simple problems. And that's what they're expecting. And now you're like, hey, I'm not just going to do like these satirical Elon tweets. I'm going to start to tweet about some of the things that I'm interested in. And it's sort of transitioning a little bit more from like Elon to presumably yourself and your own interests. What has that transition been like in terms of like some of the challenges? Maybe your audience wasn't like ready for that, but also some of probably the joy of being able to like talk about the things you're interested in.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, at first, I would say at the beginning of this year, especially with the rise of NFTs, non-fungible tokens, it felt like for some of my followers a bit of a 180-degree pivot, right? Like you're going from sort of this comedic, um, caricature to talking about kind of real world things and maybe over-indexing a little bit of your time on it, which I was doing, I would say. And I did ruffle a few feathers of people who are kind of used to like a classic sound and feel of board Elon. So I may have lost a few followers there, but I think that as I diversified my content, I actually brought in a lot more people than I lost. And ultimately, a certain kind of content grew my following, but didn't necessarily earn me any income. As I shifted to a more diversified, number of topics, it helped expand my opportunities. And it's not really just, like a money making enterprise. It really helped me get access to opportunities and people that I never could before. Because for the first 7 years or so of Board Elon, I did not engage or talk. It was literally just one way, posting content, never, liking people's stuff, never commenting, nothing like that. And when I sort of went to level 2 of this AI program that is Board Elon, it really opened up opportunities. That's where like VCs started coming to me and saying, "Hey, do you want to be on the cap table?" Or founders were coming to me saying, "Do you want to be an advisor?" So it was something that I wish I had done sooner. Was creating kind of this well-rounded pseudonym instead of being the caricature. So, long story short, and to answer your question, I think the pivot was a positive thing, and I'm still refining every day and figuring out, what does my audience enjoy and what do I enjoy talking about, and finding that balance is going to continue to evolve, as the world and culture kind of focuses on different things, and as I want to learn about new areas of interest for me. So yeah, every day I'm evolving and learning and changing.
Right. So you talked about like the benefits of becoming this more like well-rounded account or profile, whatever you want to call it, where now VCs are reaching out and founders want you to be an advisor, but you put that off for like 5 years and maybe that was, maybe you should have done it sooner. It sounds like you might have liked to have done it sooner. Why were you putting that off for so long? Like there must have been, some like was it just sort of you want this to be a one-way thing and it's less work that way and like you have your real identity to sort of maintain and didn't want to go all in on it? Or was there some fear of like what happens if you start engaging? I'm just curious about what was keeping you because 5 years is quite a long time to maintain like a one-way sort of communication thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think I treated it as an art project, and I just had this thesis of like the character should be this sort of one way dialogue, and that's going to work, and I think it did. I mean, it certainly helped me achieve the distribution that I have today, and I think part of me too just didn't want to cash in my chips too early, right? It was like me wanting to spend all those years building this up and giving people something cool and interesting for free. Because I think what you see a lot in sort of the influencer space in particular is, people get 10,000 followers and they think automatically it's time to start taking sponsorship deals and advertising and kind of, quote unquote selling out. And I didn't want anyone to ever accuse me of that. So I put in a lot of time to make sure that this was something that I felt was valuable to people or entertaining, if nothing else. Um, and then, kind of going back to the point about crypto, I just didn't, to be fully transparent, I didn't understand the untapped potential of this account. I just thought it was like a dumb project that kind of, I got lucky and just built a really big following. I didn't understand what this distribution could do for me, and what opportunities it could open. And once I started experimenting with that, mostly powered by crypto, it dawned on me really quickly how big this can go, and that it could become really more like a media empire and not just a Twitter handle. So a little bit of, I guess, ignorance on my part, but I'm happy I stuck with it because I think with any kind of project that takes a long time, especially when it doesn't earn you any money, you kind of hit a plateau and it tapers out. And I think most sort of like parody accounts like mine have not lasted as long and have not gotten as big. I don't know many that are still out there. because I think the people who ran them just got bored and didn't want to stick with it. But I did, and I'm glad I did, and I sort of kind of got it to a place where it was finally ready to elevate it to just being something beyond just like a content play.
Yeah, I mean it's certainly the biggest pseudonym or parody or any of that sort of account that I'm aware of. Like I said, 1.7 million followers, and you can see like the engagement on a lot of your content as well. It's not just like a bunch of empty followers. Like it's a really strong following, and you can do a lot with that, especially in crypto, like you mentioned. What was it about crypto, I guess, that unlocked this like next gen board Elon for you? Is it just sort of being able to accept payments to a wallet that's not attached to your real name? Is it the NFTs this past year that have really blown up and enabled you to monetize on some artwork and things like that? What's like the evolution of how crypto has sort of integrated with board Elon to allow you to do what you're doing today?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of crypto and in particular NFTs. I think for whatever reason, there's this weird psychology that makes it harder to spend dollars than it does crypto, right? So I think like when you think about this idea of someone selling a piece of artwork on the internet and you're going to tell them that it costs $10,000, that feels very expensive. But if you're like, oh, just toss me 2 ETH or whatever, 2.5 ETH, somehow that feels better, right? Because there are so many people that bought into crypto early and are sitting on in an immense amount of wealth, and are willing to kind of tap into or buy into a community or an influencer or a creator that they think is interesting. And I think that for me, once I was able to create NFTs and partner with really interesting people creating digital objects and then sell those, it wasn't me going out there and asking for like Patreon contributions or donations or payments for my tweets. Like all that kind of stuff kind of felt icky to me and it never really worked well. But once we got to a point where you could sell something that felt more tangible, and I think that NFTs really represented that, that helped unlock, I think, the true sort of monetization opportunity. And yeah, I mean that continues to flourish. I mean the world of NFTs goes up and down, but I think that because I immersed myself so much in that space, it also then taught me about investing in DeFi and all these other things that could kind of maximize my potential financially. So NFTs were the unlock, but then crypto as a whole, I think, were what really led to the board Elon kind of brand being able to expand into so many different areas.
Right. So you did a nice podcast. I can't remember the name off the top of my head on sort of a deep dive on NFTs. So I won't go too deep on this one, and we'll focus on some other things. But sort of from a high level, I've heard you describe yourself in the NFT world as like almost like a gallerist, where you're serving as sort of a platform or helping with distribution for a lot of great artists. Once you sort of realize that, like, hey, I can use my distribution and sort of create my own art, but I can also lift up these other artists and take a cut. How have you been sort of operating in the space? And I see you also have this Mars coin. Would love to hear sort of the background story on that.
Yeah, so in terms of sort of my idea around being a gallerist, it really is taking the concept of Christie's or Sotheby's and looking at myself as a gallery like that is using my distribution to elevate people who are really talented who maybe aren't marketers. I'd say the vast majority of the most talented artists that I speak to, they're really good at what they do, but marketing is not necessarily part of their skill set, and sometimes it's difficult for them to do it. They don't necessarily want to spend their time. So I think that as I immersed myself in this world, I reached out to artists that I really respected and offered them an opportunity to basically do sort of a 50-50 deal where we would concept ideas together that were on brand for me, that felt right for them. I would put them out there into the world and find the buyers, and then we would split the proceeds. And it really was a win-win. And it raised their visibility, and also helped them make more than they ever have in a decade or 20 years of doing the work they did. So it honestly felt amazing to do it. And that was something that I spent the early part of 2021 doing. in terms of the Mars coin, that was kind of one of my original creations because I'm not necessarily a graphic designer or a traditional visual artist. I'm more of a writer. I design games, I do a lot of creative stuff, but creating art isn't necessarily my skill set. But the Mars coin was basically a collectible that I created pretty early in 2021, which it was originally meant to be sort of an access coin to join my private Discord and get discounts on future sort of drops that I would have in the world of NFTs. But it's actually evolved quite a bit since then, and I'm in the process of unveiling an experience called MetaMars. And MetaMars essentially is going to be a series of mini games, kind of like an old school arcade, where people can play games and actually earn money through a few decentralized finance protocols that we're partnering with. So just to put it really simply, like imagine going to an old school arcade and everybody's playing the games, and then the people who are getting the top scores on these arcade machines are going to get prizes, and those prizes are going to come from the yield of all the money in our treasury, right? So if every week we're earning a couple $1,000 in yield from the money we're holding, we're going to use that money to reward the people who are playing our games. So we're planning on launching a few of our initial games on MetaMars towards the beginning of 2022. And eventually what we want to do is actually make it like an app store and have other people who are developing games add their games to our system so that you can basically access all sorts of games through our platform. And that we feel is like a very emblematic idea of the metaverse, right? Like it's interoperability and connecting people to different experiences. So that's kind of the high level overview. And going back to the Mars coin, we're going to reward those holders of my Mars coin with basically unlimited free play. Whereas folks who are joining later on will have to deposit money to participate.
Okay, well, that is a very cool picture that you just painted, and I hadn't heard that or read that anywhere else. So, understanding that it's not out yet and you might be hesitant to share too much detail, whatever you are willing to share, I would love to dig in a little bit more. The concept of basically having people come to this metaverse or MetaMars where there's a number of arcade-like games that they can play. It sounds like in some cases for free, in some cases pay to play. And then, it's largely just for fun, but if you're like a top performer, maybe you can earn some money. Help me sort of like differentiate this versus like a totally free game where there's like no money involved, versus maybe like a traditional video game where you're paying for the game and then you just play and there's no real money involved, versus maybe like gambling, and just like where you see this sort of falling on the spectrum, or maybe it's this new breed of thing that sort of just is different enough from everything that exists that it shouldn't really be compared.
Yeah, it's there's one unique element to it that I haven't really seen. So I think the thing that I want to make really clear is that no one will be charged to play. So the way that we're envisioning this is that let's pretend you have 1,000 players who come in and they want to play the games on MetaMars. They will deposit money into our treasury. However, whenever they wish, they can take that money out and leave. So it's essentially operating like a no loss lottery. As long as they want to play and score points, their money is sitting in our treasury, and that pile of money then is earning yield. And the more people that are playing, obviously, and the more money that they deposit, the more yield will be generated. But the idea is if you're among the top scoring players in a particular week, for example, you're then going to get more raffle tickets to win that yield, that prize that is generated from the yield. But going back to the analogy of the arcade machine, it's like you put a quarter or a token in the machine, you play the game, and when you're done, the quarter comes back out. So you're still going to always get your money back. It's just that you'll be eligible for more prizes if you're participating in this pool. So the beauty of it is like you really can't lose. It's kind of like a bank account that you can actually play games on as well, and hopefully you'll earn a little bit of yield on top of the money being stored.
Wow, yeah, that's really interesting. So, what's the incentive for NFTs? I think it's fair to say are still in the extremely early days. Like it started out as just sort of like art and, various people sort of developed a brand where they could sell the piece of art. In some cases it was like really nice. In some cases they're just sort of using their brand or their fame, like as a professional athlete or something like this. And so there was that sort of wave. And then more recently, I'm not like on the cutting edge of what's going on in NFT world or anything like that, but I've been seeing mostly like these collectibles sets of these, NFT avatars people are using for profile pictures, apes, penguins, whatever the latest
Yeah.
collection is. But the real long-term thing that to me is really interesting about NFTs is like not just, looking at them as like a piece of art, but what you can do with sort of like a provable ownership of something, which can then sort of like people are seeing, you can grant access to a Discord with it. There's various things that are starting to be done, but I think there's a lot more in the future, particularly like in the gaming world. And so when it comes to this MetaMars project that you're talking about, um, you mentioned like you don't have to pay to play, you just have to basically put some money in and you get the quarterback out when you're done playing, which is awesome. Um, what's the incentive for people, I guess, to not just put in some minimal amount so that they can play the games, but rather more? Like, are there tiers where, if you put in zero point 0.1 ETH, you get to play, but if you put in, 1 ETH or 10 ETH or 100 ETH, you get like these various different things? Is that something that you guys have had top of mind?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of nailed it. So the amount of money that is put in will determine how long you get to play, right? So it's literally increments of time, and it kind of, I keep going back to this arcade analogy, but the more quarters you put into the machine, the longer you get to play. So somebody who puts in 10 ETH versus zero point 0.1 ETH will have a lot more time to play in a particular time period, which means that they'll be able to score more points, which then means that they're eligible for more prizes at the end. The one nuance is the Mars coins that I mentioned. So unlike kind of the general public that's going to have to deposit money to play the games, anybody who's a Mars coin holder will basically be given a certain amount of time of free play every single week, and that's going to reset on a recurring basis. So that's a bit of an advantage, as they, for being sort of early stakers in the project, they're going to get some free time to play every single week. And we'll likely, do some fun airdrops and other nice perks for them. But that's kind of the core idea. But this way, it incentivizes people to put more money into the system because their potential share of the prizes will be much bigger.
Yeah, it's super cool, and I don't want to press you too much because I know it's not out yet, but appreciate you sharing what you have today, and I'll look forward like everyone else to when it's out for public and everyone can go and play. But super exciting and really looking forward to that. I want to zoom out a little bit because I know your interest in blockchain gaming is much broader, and you have this endeavor of your own, it sounds like, but have been really tracking the space from like a high level for a while. And you just did a tweet storm today with like an interesting sort of narrative, like an overall perspective on your thoughts. And I thought with it being fresh of mind, it would be interesting to walk through certain aspects of that and to get your perspective on the blockchain gaming space as a whole. So the thread, it started by talking about Magic the Gathering and how that was an innovation by combining play with collectibles and sort of the physical world. Can you speak a little bit to like, first of all, why did you start the thread with that, and why was that such an important innovation in the world of gaming?
Yeah, I think with NFTs, there really are two use cases right now. One is kind of a status symbol, so that's the avatar or a really high value piece of art, and that's just a luxury good, right? The same way like a Rolex is or a Ferrari. And then the other is utility, is something that you basically are enabled to do something like enter a private Discord or get access to an experience, might be even physical. But where my head always goes when I think about utility in the NFT space is gaming, because gaming is something that is a massive industry. It's something that people spend a lot of time and money on. And if you think about just kind of the immediate opportunities for utility of digital products, gaming is kind of a no-brainer. And I come from the world of traditional video games. I won't go into too much detail on that, but I spent over a decade there. I think that the really big AAA publishers are doing very well financially and don't necessarily need to explore, tokenizing their games and offering ownership of digital products to their players right now, because there's literally billions of people who are willing to spend their time and money on games and get nothing in return other than status, right? So that they can say they're the top 1,000 Call of Duty player, or that they beat their buddy in FIFA, whatever it might be. But I truly believe the future of gaming is going to be ownership. So your character, your vehicle, your weapons, your land in a particular game, that is something that you can own and trade with people and sell. And the beauty of that equation is that the game publishers still make tons of money, right? When they're selling these items to individuals who want to own them in game universes, but they're also creating another economy for the players who are able to trade and sell and buy amongst themselves. And that, to me, expands the pie of the economy of games. And the reason I started the tweet thread you mentioned with Magic the Gathering is because if you're kind of new to this world and you don't really understand the idea of like owning, digital goods in a video game, Magic is just such a clear way to explain it, because Magic really kind of cracked the nut on the intersection of collectibles and a game, right? So before Magic, you had things like baseball cards, and those were collectible and cool, but they didn't really have any function, right? They were just something that you owned and were scarce and valuable. And then you had things like board games and card games, and people played those, but they were not necessarily scarce or unique or valuable. And so with Magic, a game was created where you had these rare items, where some of the most rare items actually like helped you win games, and they basically combine these things, which basically merge that world of collectible and games. And after that, you got tons of things like Yu-Gi-Oh and Pokemon and so many other things. And so that was kind of the physical version of what you're seeing now today in games, which is people owning things that are rare and scarce and collectible, and they also have utility. And as I alluded to in the tweet thread, the beauty of it is, unlike a rare Magic the Gathering or Pokemon card that you never actually play with because it can get torn or lost or whatever, digital goods are pretty perfect. You're not going to bend the corner of a file, right? So either you have it in your wallet or you don't, but it's always going to be in perfect condition. So this is not something that has become that big of an industry yet, but I'm banking on the fact that it will, because right now there's under 1 million people right now who are kind of actively participating in the blockchain gaming world, but there's over 3 billion people on Earth who play video games. So as you can see, the gap, if you close that gap, there's a lot of opportunity in blockchain gaming. And I think that as more people see financial incentives, while they're having fun and, socializing with people online and in video games, there's going to be massive growth. So I think as it relates to like NFTs and crypto, blockchain gaming is just a huge opportunity. And because of my background, professionally, it's an area that I'm focusing very heavily on.
Yeah, it's crazy. You're in this sounds like you found yourself in a very interesting position where you've got this huge online following that in part was you were able to sort of double down on it thanks to crypto, and your background in video games or gaming more broadly is now perhaps like one of the more interesting elements within crypto, or one of the more interesting spaces within crypto that's poised to take off. Just like you mentioned, 1 million blockchain gamers versus 3 billion general video game players. You can't help but imagine there's a lot of upside opportunity there in the coming year or years or decades or whatever it might be. I guess, given that it is so small today, what do you think are like the first, what's like the first catalyst that gets this to catch on? I know there's like Axie Infinity has been pretty popular, but there's, I don't think, a very long list of blockchain games that have sort of shown promise. You certainly would be able to speak to it a lot better than I could, and maybe you can. But I'm curious what brings us from like this sort of day zero in blockchain gaming world to maybe day one, day two, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, right now I'd say there's about five, like 5 games in the blockchain gaming space that's really building up a significant audience of hundreds of thousands of players, but it's still a blip compared to the broader space. So I think that's going to change very quickly. I mean, as I've started sort of investing in companies, I get lots of pitch decks every single week, and I have no doubt that within a year we're going to have 1,000 blockchain games on the market. Now, the vast majority of them won't be good, because everybody fancies themselves a game designer, but it's very hard to make a game that's fun. So people will have to sift through plenty of crap. But that said, I think that the availability of hundreds or thousands of blockchain games will then lead to there being 10, 20, maybe 50 really high quality games. And that's going to kind of create the next wave of interest. And then after that, I think what will happen is one of the larger, maybe indie video game companies or even a AAA video game company, the size of an Ubisoft or Epic or EA, will come along and they'll basically kind of reverse engineer what we're seeing now, where they don't necessarily make it a blockchain centric experience. They take the games that they already have and then build blockchain into it so that players are able to buy, sell, trade within the game and make it a super easy front end. Because the masses still don't really understand things like having a web wallet and creating an account on Coinbase and loading up funds and all that. So I think once the big game publishers make a really seamless experience and then enable what you're seeing right now with some of the bigger titles like Axie Infinity, that's what's going to take us from 1 million to 100 million or even a billion. And I think we're within 2 to 3 years of that happening. So in the meantime, I'm just investing in new IP and picks and shovel companies that are going to help enable some of the bigger players to kind of get into the space more easily.
Right. So last thing on the thread, you had mentioned that you thought the winners from this space would basically be the people who prioritize fun, ownership, and interoperability. Those were like sort of the three main keys to success, I think, that you had highlighted, versus the alternative of, the alternative to fun would be something that you could just go and make money, but it's not particularly fun, or the alternative to ownership being something where you really have to like put in a lot of time and it's a direct trade-off of time for money versus ownership where you can potentially be making money in your sleep for whatever it is that you own. And interoperability obviously sort of enabling, that's like probably from my perspective, like maybe the key of why this blockchain gaming thing is interesting in the first place. You can bring your stuff all across all these different games, all across all these different like metaverses, whatever you want to call it, and that's sort of what crypto enables. So I guess why are these three things sort of the keys from your perspective? And have you seen like interesting applications of these or games that are prioritizing on these sort of fronts thus far?
Yeah, I mean, I think all things being equal, the players, the game publishers who can do all three of these things are going to win. And I think of all the stakeholders involved, whether it's the traditional games world or the blockchain gaming world, you've got people doing 2 out of the 3, but not all of them. So in the traditional gaming world, they're really good at making fun games. And on occasion, they even dabble in interoperability where you can cross play a certain game, no matter if you're playing on a PlayStation or a PC. You see games like Fortnite where they're bringing in characters from other IP, whether it's Marvel or Mortal Kombat or whatever it might be, which is really cool to see, but it's still pretty infrequent. On the blockchain gaming side, you have ownership really standing out as kind of the primary win, but there aren't a ton of games that are fun. And in terms of interoperability, that's still a struggle as well because you have so many different chains that are being used for blockchain gaming, whether it's Ethereum or Polygon or Solana. So it's certainly better in terms of interoperability, but it's not quite where it needs to be. So I don't think anyone's nailing all three, but I think that we're getting very close to the time period where people will be nailing all three. And when that happens, that's going to be who becomes the next Blizzard or Riot or Nintendo, is because they've mastered those. And all things being equal, if you're a player, you're going to go to the games that basically give you all three of these things, or at least that's my theory. And we shall see how it plays out.
Yeah, I mean, I think it sounds very reasonable. The thing that I can't really help but think about, not being like a huge gamer myself, but just sort of recognizing how many people play video games. it's like if you can sort of add in this additional component, which blockchain and crypto seems poised to offer, that you can go in these games and it just becomes a lot more real. Like you're earning real money potentially for whatever you're doing inside of this game world. And it seems to me that like quote unquote game is just like a word where people, it's like Ready Player One or Snow Crash, whatever your favorite like version of the metaverse might be. But these games could really start becoming places where people sort of live like you and not like maybe literally like they're not physically sleeping there or whatever it is, but spending the vast majority of their days. You already have seen in the last couple of years, people have gone from spending maybe 50% of their waking time in the office or whatever it was to spending it all at home. It seems that there's almost like a hole to be filled where people could go and spend 50, 70, whatever percent of their time um, in this quote unquote metaverse or whatever it ends up being called. How do you see, I guess, the transition from like these early blockchain games, which to be fair, have maybe yet to really show themselves in their true form with just like a million people, like you said, thus far, and that sort of becoming, something bigger than just video games and something that actually becomes like a meaningful part of potentially like billions of people's everyday lives?
Yeah, I mean, I think that games really, to some degree, have become, but will continue to become the town square and a place where people socialize. And I think it will be a good thing when people shift a lot of the time they used to spend on social media platforms and shift them to games. I think that it will be a more creative way to spend time, a more enriching way to spend time, and also a less kind of psychologically destructive way to spend time. Again, that's my theory, and we'll see if that proves to be true. But if you look at blockchain aside, if you look at like how a lot of teenagers are spending their time, they're going on Fortnite, enabling Fort chat, voice chat, and they're just chatting with their buddies, and they're just playing the game and connecting with each other the same way that people used to jump on the phone and talk to their friends 20 or 30 years ago. So it is kind of filling that gap and extra time that we have, and I think that with the pandemic and what it did for kind of location and where we spend time during the day, with people not commuting to work and necessarily spending 8+ hours at an office where they don't necessarily need to be putting all that time into getting the job done that they need to get done. There's just free time during the day, and that can go to all sorts of things. It could go towards hiking, being in nature. It could be going towards family. It could be going towards more social media and more watching television, or it can go towards games. And I think that as you see games become a place for socialization and monetization, it's just going to naturally attract people to spend more time there. And it's not going to be a difficult sort of transition for people to make because everyone is familiar with games. And at this point, anybody who's kind of alive has probably at least gotten some familiarity with growing up with playing video games of some sort. So as wild as it might seem, to talk about like the idea of people like working in the metaverse and making money in the metaverse and spending time, their free time there, we're kind of already doing it, and it's just basically going to be something that is a bit more lucrative for people in the future. At least I hope so.
And do you see this like in the next, call it 3, 5 years, whatever? Do you see this being like a lot of people on their desktops, on some sort of video game console, on mobile, in a VR headset? Because I know crypto has been sort of oddly desktop first versus like mobile, despite the world moving towards mobile. And if we're building these games on the blockchain, I'm curious where you see that sort of unfolding, at least in these initial years of its sort of emergence.
Yeah, I mean, I think if this plays out and crypto gaming or blockchain gaming becomes really popular, it will accelerate the death of consoles. Those things are just not enabled really for this type of experience. Now, I think that they'll still be around for really high performance video games that are not necessarily connected on chain, and that's fine. And that'll be more like a luxury product. But I think it does make sense for blockchain games to continue to blow out the market of PCs and mobile. And I agree with your point that mobile is a lot more accessible and friendly for people who are kind of like casual gamers. I think for now, just because it's such a nascent time, like desktop is going to be the way to go. And then people are going to build, applications that make it a lot easier for mobile games to thrive. And I don't think that'll take long. I think we're talking about like 12 months or less. And that's going to be a really big unlock for bringing in millions of people because of the 3 billion gamers, I referenced. A big chunk of that is just casual mobile gamers. They're not people who are playing, an Xbox or on a gaming PC.
Yeah, so I guess we're coming up on the end of time here. We've got like 10 minutes left, and I'd be remiss if we didn't at least touch on pseudonymity generally, given that that's sort of the way I've chosen to build my brand, and obviously you've done the same and been doing so for several years longer. I thought it was interesting. I had heard, I think, on another podcast that you did, how, we talked a bit at the top of the show about how Bored Elon got started. But you mentioned, I think, how like in the beginning it was nice just to be able to like tweet without worrying about, what work would think. And it was very much like the same, and correct me if I'm wrong on that, but it was very much the same for me where like I originally started without doing things like under my full real name because I had sort of like there was a few reasons, but I just quit my job and I sort of didn't want people like going and like seeing like, oh, he quit 2 months ago, like what's he up to now? And seeing that I was just like writing a blog at the time, and not really like embarrassment, but I was like writing about things that just weren't really like professional. They were just sort of like personal, and I was doing a lot of thinking and a lot of writing, and it was just very freeing to have this pseudonymous domain, I guess, where um, I could just write about whatever I wanted to write about and then later tweet about whatever I want to tweet about, podcast about whatever I want to podcast about. And so in a way, this like fake name allowed me to be a little bit more authentic. I felt like I'm curious if that has sort of been the case for you at all, and if your sort of reasoning for being pseudonymous has maybe evolved over the several years that you've been operating under Board Elon.
Yeah, I mean, when I started the account, I really did not foresee the benefits of growing a pseudonymous account. I was really leaning more into just creating a character that was fun. But I think over the last few years, I've grown to really appreciate the freedom of pseudonymity. It still has a reputation, right? Like if I say something really horrible on Twitter, and I get quote unquote canceled, that can still happen, right? Because I've developed a very valuable reputation, and I can lose that reputation just like a human being can. But I think that separating kind of my real identity from the board brand has been freeing because I just don't worry as much about looking stupid, right? So it's not kind of like an anti-cancellation device. It's just a um, it gives me freedom to try things and experiment and not worry about what people think about me. And I think that I'm someone who believes that there's a lot of untapped creativity in people all over the world, and the reason that you don't see it is not the lack of creativity. It's just the fear of what your friends will think, what your employer will think, what the general public will think. And as you evolve in your career or in life in general, the stakes are higher, right? You have to be a lot more careful about what you say and how you're spending your time. And I think that again, regardless of like how risky it is for you to say something and get in trouble, it's just that kind of that nagging fear of like how will people think about what I say just gets in your way, and it stops you from taking some risks, and it stops you from trying things that might be really beneficial to you and other people. So I think for me, I was always somebody who didn't really care if I looked stupid, but bored elevated that ability even more. And so I've tried 100 things before I had bored Elon, and they failed, and people forgot about that. But bored was the one that stuck, and it's benefited me greatly, and it's because I took a chance. So if anyone's listening and they're kind of thinking, oh, maybe I should just kind of create an alternate account and let's see what happens, I would say, yeah, do it. It doesn't matter if it's followed by 5 people or 100 people. It's an outlet for you to try stuff, and if you are prolific, one of those things might hit, and it might be a really great opportunity. So I strongly encourage it, and I imagine you do as well, Jake.
Yeah, I totally back that message, and I think share a lot in common in terms of like already having been someone who I think generally was a little less scared to fail and believed that the more you fail, the more opportunities you have to succeed, and it's just beneficial in the long run. But doing things not under my full name just was an additional unlock, like a level beyond that. And one thing that's been sort of interesting for me to see is that, I'm nowhere near you. I've got like a couple thousand followers on Twitter and a bunch of podcast listeners, but still relatively early, but, still beyond where I started, where like literally, a handful of people I was sharing what I was doing with. And so I was basically just putting it out into the abyss, whatever I was writing or talking about or whatever it might have been. And since then, with some people following and some reputation, like you said, like it's very much a real reputation, right? Even though it's not attached to your full name. And so I do have like a little bit more friction to putting things out there than I did when I first started. And I'm curious if you've experienced that. Now, obviously, you have this prolific brand where you've got over 1 million people reading things that you write. And I'm curious if that friction from sort of the real world and your real identity has come back at all, where you do have to think about, can I share this or is this going to be dumb? Maybe it helps a little bit that you've got like this Bordy on brand where part of the brand is to be a little dumb on some of the ideas, which a lot of them are really smart though. So it's a little bit of a confusing brand, but it's obviously been working for you. I'm curious if like the large following, I guess, has introduced any hesitancy, which, sort of to counter that initial freedom that comes from starting a pseudonymous brand.
As I get bigger and get involved in more like business deals and whatnot, I certainly have that fear sometimes that props up. And then my tactic is I go over to actual Elon Musk's Twitter account and I see what he's posting about, and I'm like, wow, this guy is at times the richest person on earth, and he's shit posting and like putting up stupid memes. And you know what? If he can do it and keep running a rocket company, I think I'm okay too. So that's my personal tactic that keeps me honest and prevents me from letting that fear creep up of looking stupid.
Yeah, that is sounds like a good strategy. And he definitely, I think he's missing something that gives people fear of like saying something stupid in public, because, or maybe that's just the confidence you get when you're building like AI and rockets and electric cars and all the rest. But either way, he is definitely
Yeah, I
exceptionally
mean,
skilled in that department.
I think he mentioned when he was on Saturday Night Live that he has he's on like the Asperger's spectrum. So perhaps that is a component of it. But yeah, he definitely puts himself out there and doesn't mind looking silly. But what people will remember him for is what worked well. And regardless of what you think of him, he's accomplished more than 99.999% of humans ever will. And it's hard to fault him for that, just despite a couple of things he might say that you disagree with or think are dumb.
Yeah, 100%. And he's definitely, as recent as this week, he's been in the headlines for a few of those things. But I think the SpaceX and the Tesla and all of these, and hopefully Mars will be the things that people remember, not the one-off tweet to said politician who will remain nameless. But Board, I appreciate you coming on the show today and taking the time. It's been really great to talk with someone else who's doing things a little bit differently and certainly further along the road. And I'm really excited for this project, the MetaMars that's coming out soon. Where can people go? Obviously follow you at Board Elon Musk on Twitter, but anywhere else you want to point people to go, see updates or get a hold of MetaMars when it comes out, or is Twitter just the best place for you?
Yeah, I mean, definitely Twitter is great. If you have any listeners who are into crypto, they can go check out boardelonmusk.eth if you want to like spy on my wallet and see what I'm investing in, what kind of stuff I have. I certainly would appreciate it. Don't send me any crap, NFTs, but if you want to spy on stuff, go ahead. And then other than that, on my Twitter profile, I have a newsletter sign up. So I've got a couple of big projects and announcements coming over the next 90 days. And I'll probably be sharing those first via email, very old school. But yeah, if people want to sign up for my email, that would be great.
All right, Board. Well, I'm looking forward to the flippening when Board becomes more famous than the real Elon. But until then, looking forward to MetaMars and a lot of cool stuff around the corner, it sounds like. So thanks again, and look forward to keeping in touch.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jake.